Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Wavelength.
Just because we're doing our lectures online doesn't mean that we need to then retreat and make life, all about being alone.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide.
I think there's not enough knowledge around the severity of the long-term impacts that a concussion can give you, and it's not really educated enough.
You should be having.
The minimum job search requirements is definitely problematic, and it is up to a computer to decide whether you receive your payments each month.
This is Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, Cass, and hello, Adelaide. Hope you're doing well. Excited for another episode of Wavelength. We do have some exciting changes that I need to tell you about before we jump in. Alex, our beautiful ginger friend, has moved away. Do not worry, I am as sad as you are. I'm sure he'll be back to pop in and say hello to all of you. Now that we've discussed the sad part, it's time to tell you guys about something I am beyond excited about. We have a new co-host, the absolute beautiful, gorgeous Grace will be joining me in the studio with you all. Hello, Grace.
Hello, I'm so excited.
I know, me too. I feel like we've spoken for the past hour, catch up on each other's lives, and we're ready to take on the world.
Exactly
honestly.
right. Watch out, everyone.
It's ready. It's me and Grace forever and forever.
Alex too. I'm just kidding. We miss you, Alex.
We miss you so much. I am sure you've all clicked on that Grace is no stranger to Wavelength, and you've definitely heard her voice on the station. Though she isn't new, you will be hearing some new voices to Wavelength. So tonight, please all make them feel very welcome. Well, I reckon it's time to jump in. What do you reckon, Grace?
Yes, we have no time to lose. This week, Liliana is speaking to Louise Miller-Frost, the MP for Boothby, and Slew Button about the new Voice to Parliament Act. That's not all. Trevor is talking to you through the recent Tafe Sa data breach, and Jasmine is talking to you all through the good news that happened this week.
Holy moly, we do have a lot this episode. Before we get into any of that, we are speaking to the Lord Mayor of Adelaide City, Dr Jane Lomax Smith.
Maggie, take it away.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Today in the studio we have a very special guest, Dr Jane Lomax Smith, the Lord Mayor of the City of Adelaide. Thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to start by introducing yourself and explaining to our listeners your role?
Well, the Lord Mayor has a kind of peculiar role in that you're partly ceremonial. You have to do formulaic things like citizenship ceremonies and welcomes to the city, and chair lots of meetings, but also you have a chance to really find out what's going on.
You have a medical background with a very impressive career in clinical and research medicine, as well as running hospital departments and private practices. How do you incorporate that background into your role as Lord Mayor?
I think that having a scientific training means that you want facts, you want evidence, you want numbers, you want proof. And that capacity to interrogate information and make decisions is really important in public life, particularly if you're spending other people's money. I think that being a doctor gives you a bit of an edge in interpreting people's feelings. I've always had, people call it the bullshit monitor, but it's actually knowing if someone's fibbing, and doctors generally can tell if people are not telling the truth, and I think understanding when people are lying to you is a really important skill in public life.
You've been quite vocal about your opinions on protecting the parklands. Could you explain to our listeners what that entails?
Always lived in big cities, and I love urban living. I'm much more comfortable in a city, but I love to have the opportunity to go into an open space. And from the time I arrived in Adelaide, I was seriously gobsmacked by the parklands. And the more I learned about its historic significance, how it was designed purposefully, it wasn't just an accident, a bit of grass that was left over and forgotten about. It was a purposeful design to have a circle of park around the city living area. And having realised it was laid out 170 years ago as a rim of parkland makes you think that there's something special about it. And when you look at urban design around the world, there are no other cities that are built within a park. Often cities have parks, but they're not within a park. And then you look at the city grid structure and you realise that it's actually not just interesting, it's unique. And for that reason alone, we need to value it. On top of that, as our cities got more congested and hotter in terms of climate, those green areas are important. And the more high-rise you build, the more urgent it is to maintain our open space. And so I feel really strongly that as a city council, we're custodians of that land. We look after it not just for the residents of the city or North Adelaide. We look after it as a heritage-listed, iconic piece of open space that belongs to the people of South Australia. And that's why I get really cross when governments come along and want to build things. And what I've learned over the years is that every idea is a wonderful idea. And the people who want to build on the parklands are decent human beings. They're lovely people. They want to support women's sport. They want to support golf. They want to support a nice hospital. But if you let everybody do a good thing on the parklands, you've got nothing left. And nibbling away at it is one thing. But we're getting to the stage now where governments have really begun to look at our parklands and think, frankly, not that it's irreplaceable, not that it's priceless, not that it's unique, but it's an easy, cheap option. And that's why I keep fighting, because if I don't fight for it, your listeners and their children will have nothing left.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks so much for that, Maggie. And Lord Mayor, I was saying to Cassie, I will listen to her talk about the parklands all day. What an accent.
Oh my God, fascinating. It was incredible.
Beautiful voice. Be the new David Attenborough.
Petition to make the Lord Mayor of Adelaide the new David Attenborough. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And me and Grace are going to make it happen. I think, though, she had a really interesting perspective on the parklands. We were speaking about this before. Obviously, Fresh is right next to where the Fringe is held every year. And it comes alive in those February to March months. It'd be so lovely to see not developments, but more love be put into those parklands. Because what she was saying, it is gorgeous and very unique to the city.
It was interesting to hear her say, I hadn't considered that, yes, so many things happen and we want all the tourism and it's a beautiful spot to host things. It's so central, but it does need that time to breathe and a gorgeous spot for people to have lunch where nothing's going on while they're in the city. It does need that recuperation process.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. If you have just tuned in, right before the break, we spoke to Dr Jane Lomax Smith, the Lord Mayor of Adelaide City.
You may have seen on the news that the Albanese government proposed an act that would ensure Indigenous Australians were able to form a committee that would advise the government to give advice, to really ensure that Indigenous Australians were considered more in parliamentary system. Since this was announced, one of the voices disagreeing is Jacinta Price, a senator from the Northern Territory who states it's simply surface level and that no Indigenous committees were considered in the decision-making. But the Act has been supported by several other First Nations peoples. To get to the bottom of this, Liliana spoke with Sewlyn Button.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Mr. Button,
Yeah.
do you support an Indigenous voice to Parliament?
Yeah, I do. I'm a member of the referendum engagement group, and certainly our work is over the next few months is to get out in the public and start having conversations with Australian people to make sure that people understand the benefits of the voice and how best we can keep the public informed when they go to the polls at the end of the year.
There have been politicians such as Jacinta Price who have outwardly spoken about her opposition to the Indigenous Voice to Parliament bill. What is your view on the large group of Indigenous people that haven't been supporting the bill?
Look, what we have known, and certainly for a long period of time, is that the polling of Indigenous people across the country shows us that more than 80% of Aboriginal and Islander people actually support a voice to Parliament. So there's a large majority of our mob across Australia who do support a voice to Parliament. There are a number of people who don't, including Senator Price, but certainly the large majority do. And I guess in respect of that, the actual Uluru Statement from the Heart, which is where the idea and the concept of the voice to Parliament is drawn from, that was a process there where consultations happened right across the country, where there was regional dialogues in local communities that culminated, and there were 12 of those that then culminated in a national constitutional convention which was held at Uluru to then inform the development of the Uluru Statement. Now, all of those conversations across the country, there was an overwhelming majority of support for a voice to Parliament. So this isn't an idea that's just been dreamt up in the last couple of years. This is an idea that's been sitting within Indigenous communities all across the country for a long period of time, and it's now being brought to fruition through the Uluru Statement and the Prime Minister's commitment to a referendum.
Do you agree at all that it is too surface level or even too little too late or disingenuous at all?
No, I don't. I think it is the obvious next step. It is what Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people have called for, and there's a long history across the country of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people calling for change in the constitution of the country to ensure that Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are best represented within the Australian Constitution. And those things date back 90-odd years, and the first known petition of the King back 90 years ago was for an Aboriginal man whose name was William Cooper, where he petitioned the King from Melbourne to look at recognising Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people in Australia's constitution. So it's a long process where this has been something that communities have called for over many years. And ultimately, getting the change in the Constitution is about having a seat at the table, having a voice, and being able to inform policy and legislation at the point it's being developed, as opposed to responding to it after the fact.
The referendum is undoubtedly a huge step in government for the Indigenous community. What would the passing of this bill mean for First Nations people?
Look, what it'll mean is a significant opportunity through our mob to be informing policy and legislation at the point of its creation. For many years, and certainly over the last 60-odd years, since the 1967 referendum, where the Australian government was actually given the power to create policy and legislation for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, what it actually means is that Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are consulted and are part of the process to inform policy and legislation that affects them. What we have seen over the last 60-odd years is when policy and legislation is being developed and the voices of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people aren't part of that process, that what we do see is plenty of policy failures. And you only have to look at the Close the Gap statistics, certainly over the last 20-odd years, where you've seen significant, a decline in outcomes across the whole range of social indicators. What this opportunity means is that there'll be voices at the table to inform that policy and legislation to ensure that it's not only about the lived experiences and certainly the community stories to inform policy and legislation, but it's also about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people being accountable for the outcomes in terms of the programs and services being delivered to them as well.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Liliana and Sewlyn Button. Don't go anywhere. You have me and Grace till 7 p.m. You're here with Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength.
Right now, we are talking about the Voice of Parliament Act. Before the break, you heard Sewlyn Button. To find out more, we have Louise Miller-Frost, the recently elected Labor MP for Boothby.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Louise, how did you support the Voice to Parliament Act through your campaign?
Look, this has been something that's been around for a long time, so I've been very open that that is the position of the Labor Party, and it's absolutely my position as well. I have a background in public health, and one of the principles of public health is nothing about me without me, and that's pretty much what the Voice is about. It's about enabling Aboriginal people to have input into the laws and policies that we put in place specifically for them in order to actually make it work better than it certainly has in the past.
Do you have faith that the Australian public will vote yes to the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum?
Oh, look, it's very hard to predict the future, but I do see an awful lot of goodwill in the community. The people who talk to me, even those who have questions, want to make a difference for our First Nations people, and we want to make sure that it actually works. So I'm hopeful.
Have you spoken to Indigenous people about the bill?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, look, the people that I have spoken to have been very much in favour. They are somewhat fearful of what this campaign might bring out, and, you know, being the subject of any form of campaign, I'm sure is extremely challenging, being spoken about in the third person. but they're very hopeful that this will be the way that we can work on closing the gap together.
Now, were these conversations had before or after the bill was announced?
Yeah, well, both. I have a number of Aboriginal friends who I've spoken to on a whole range of issues over time, so both.
The Liberal Party have recently announced their position in being against the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Seeing as some of Australia are openly against the bill, including that of First Nations people, do you believe the referendum can be won without bipartisanship?
Look, unfortunately, we're in a position where that's our only way forward. I do know that there are a lot of people on the Liberal side who do in fact support the voice, both people in party, in Parliament, and also supporters on the ground out in the community. So I'm hoping, I was hopeful that they might have a conscience vote so that people could actually vote how they felt. And I've got to give absolute respect to Julian Leeser for the choices that he's made in order to stand up for the principles that he believes in.
In February, you had a picnic to discuss what the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament will mean for Boothby. How did that help your campaign?
Look, a lot of people had questions, and it was a terrific time because we had Attorney General Kai Ma come out as well. So he talked about the voice to Parliament for South Australia, which was their legislative voice, and I talked about the upcoming referendum. And it was a really great opportunity for people to get together, ask questions in a public forum, but also talk to us afterwards and ask questions that they didn't want to ask publicly. And we ended up with a lot of volunteers coming out of that, people who were really keen to get out there and campaign to get the yes result.
South Australia has recently become the first state in Australia to have a First Nations voice to Parliament. What does this mean for South Australia and what comes next?
For South Australia, this means that there is a voice to the South Australian Parliament, so they will no doubt be in the process of setting up how that will work for them in terms of local structures and connections back to the local communities. What it means ultimately is that when Parliament is making laws or policies that specifically address the issues experienced by Aboriginal people, they will have access to good quality advice from the people it affects. And it goes back to that, as I said, nothing about me without me. As a public health practitioner, if I were to design a program that addressed the health needs of young people or older people or men or women, I'd go and talk to them and I'd get that information, because I can come up with the best program in the world, but if it doesn't work for the people on the ground, then it's useless and it's a waste of taxpayer money. So this is an opportunity for South Australian government to have that specific legislated input going into their decision-making process.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Liliana and Louise. How do you feel about that interview, Grace?
Really interesting. I think so much of it was online and you'd see articles, but it was hard to know more about kind of what it all meant.
For sure.
So hearing a bit more in depth about those things was interesting, and I'm excited to see how it unfolds in the future in terms of how the voices are heard of the Indigenous peoples.
Absolutely.
What changes come directly from those voices, and if it is just performative or not.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of speak from Indigenous peoples and the media in general about whether or not there's going to be performative, and I think time will tell. And I'm really hoping for, I think, Australia's benefit that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
In all honesty, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, time will tell. But right after the break, we'll hear about the Tafe data breaches, and don't even think of going anywhere. You're here on Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Recently in the news, it was released that Tafe had a significant data and privacy breach that compromised over 2,000 students personally. To find out more, luckily, we have Trevor talking to us through it.
Wavelength Explains on Fresh 92.7.
Over 2,000 Tafe Sa students were exposed to an alarming identity theft due to a security data breach releasing personal stolen credentials such as driver's license, date of birth and passports. How has this or how can this affect you? If you have put in an application to enrol or have been a student at any Tafe Sa college around South Australia between 2016 and 2021, then a potential data leak concerning your personal details may have been exposed. The Tafe breach was discovered by accident by local SA police during a search under unrelated crimes. 2 USB drives have been found containing scanned copies of the students' personal information. The current investigation revealed that the breach happened over a year ago in December 2021, and the data obtained by the potential thieves happened on 2 separate occasions. One USB being found containing 24 student data leaks within the college in March 2022, and then another USB found in November 2022 that revealed that 2,224 student application forms have been stolen. This information of the breach was discovered on the 4th of April 2023, as the identity theft had allegedly been going on since of 2016, with leaked applications since then. While currently police are still undergoing investigation, there is no knowledge of connection from the 3 security breaches in the past year with popular Australian businesses such as Optus, Medibank and now Tafe. A forensic analysis has been hired in place by the college to figure out how and why the personal information was stolen and then leaked. Mr. David Coltman, the Tafe Sa chief executive that came out and spoke about the breach when first occurred, says that at this moment they are unable to confirm in how exactly when or by whom the breach occurred. The students have then since been informed that their credentials have been leaked. A statement regarding the incidents have been made and can be viewed by the official Tafe website. Tafe is stepping in by making a tougher, stronger security measure to ensure the safety of their students and their students' personal information.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Trevor. You killed it. First time on the airwaves. You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
It's been pretty gloomy in Adelaide this week, so let's brighten up your week with some heaps good news. Jasmine, take it away.
I know there's gonna be heaps good news on Wavelength.
Hey, I'm Jasmine, and here's the heaps good news of this week. The future could see Australia's first Indigenous astronaut with a new program launched in Adelaide at the end of last month by Monash University and NASA. The National Indigenous Space Academy, or NISA, will see up to 5 Indigenous Australian STEM students attend a full-time internship program at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. These students will be mentored by experts from NASA, getting to work on all those cool projects like rovers, space missions, and AI. NISA is led by Indigenous Australian Christopher Lawrence, an inaugural Associate Dean of Monash's Faculty of IT. He hopes the program will help inspire the next generation of Indigenous Australian students to choose a career in STEM. A kind of program like this will help pave the way for Indigenous Australian STEM students across the country to rise in space research and explore the stars. While being developed by Monash, it will still be available to Indigenous Australian students across all national unis and will include a space bootcamp focusing on learning paths such as aerodynamics, astrophysics, sciences and engineering. Applications are still open, so if you're a post or undergrad student in STEM, you can apply through www.monash.edu/IT/NISA. That's www.monash.edu/IT/NISA. We move north for our next story, where a group of self-proclaimed grannies are dedicating their golden years to coaching confidence and companionship to refugee children by teaching important English, writing and conversational skills. Principal of Blair Athol North Primary School, Darren Stevenson, first created the remote teaching program alongside his mother Jill at the peak of the pandemic to help students 101. Most of these children are refugees from Afghanistan who arrived in Australia with little to no English. It has helped these kids become more confident in speaking and become open about their lives back home. 3 years on, the program at Blair Athol, Jill with her friends who are of teaching background are now helping in person around 100 of the 500 students in the school, with about 42 different nationalities represented. Mrs. Stevenson wishes to expand the coaching sessions in the future and hopes to find financial support to continue this amazing work with the community. So shout out to Jill, Betty, Sherry, Julie and Judy, the real life Golden Girls. Gratitude, empathy and mindfulness, all important conventions of life and the key principles of a nationwide venture called the Resilience Project that's currently involved in empowering the next generation of rural SA and the nation. Swan Ridge Area School is one of the 1,000 plus schools that has undertaken the task of teaching their students about well-being and resilience as part of a 3-year program in a national initiative. The Resilience Program describes itself as a project that delivers engaging programs to schools around the country that provide mental health-based strategies to develop resilience and happiness through presentation, school curriculum, and more. With 1 in 4 kids being affected by a mental illness and 82% of young people having experienced mental health issues, the Resilience Project school program is engaging with students, teachers, and their parents to be able to have the capacity to learn about mental health and adversity, which is important for the post-pandemic climate and rural communities. With Swan Reach still coping with the devastation of the Maryland floods, their participation is more than well timed. So far, it's not only taught the students about emotional literacy, empathy, and gratitude, but it's helped empower the entire school community. We hope to see the Resilience Project continue to impact more of our rural and metro communities and create a safer environment for our future students.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
And that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you so much for listening.
Make sure you subscribe to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and tonight's episode will be up soon.
Whether you're listening to us in the car or at home or on Spotify, I just want you to know that you are loved and that we are going to get the Lord Mayor to be the new David Attenborough. What do you think, Grace?
I support nothing more.
You're listening to Fresh.
Love you.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.